Hiya, I'm Ellie. I'm here today because I want to talk about a really important topic, which is the processes and the issues behind globalisation and the production of fast fashion. So I've got my notes here. It's basically a presentation that I've done for uni, but I'm just rehashing it for you guys today. Because why would I make something new? I don't have the time for that. The topic of this video today is sort of theories of globalisation in relation to fashion and dress, looking at global capitalism and the fashion industry and what that means within the frames of production and consumption. I've looked at a few different theorists that I might bring up today, including Margaret Maynard and her book Dress and Globalisation, but also Naomi Klein's No Logo and Tansy Hoskins' book Stitched Up, the Anti-Capitalist Book of Fashion, which I first read a few years ago when I was in sixth form actually, and it's really stuck with me, and it's a really easy to digest book, so I would definitely recommend that if you want to look into this topic some more. So what is globalisation? It's something that's hard to place one meaning or one definition onto. It's almost become a fact of our lives and something that we can't think about specifically. Its time frame isn't set and it seems too widespread to even do anything about. Often we think of it as being a modern phenomenon, but you could argue that it started with the British Empire setting up colonies, or with the industrialisation processes of the 18th and 19th century, where products were being shipped from, for example, India to consumers in Europe, and how that then continued and continued and continued throughout the very capitalist 20th century into where we are today, where products are being made on one side of the world and being sold in shops a week later. I'm going to be looking at three main aspects of globalisation and what they mean when they all come together as one. So there's brand power, which means that companies often have more power than elected governments of countries in terms of their cultural influence and their economic power, and also the global visibility of brands through logos and campaigns and the products. There's the systems of production, and this is the idea of a global village, which suggests connectivity between people and between markets, but also this contrast with the distancing that a lot of people see between the production of a product and the finished thing that you buy. And finally, the systems of consumption. So I'm going to be questioning the power that the consumer has over processes of globalisation and the role of what ethical consumption could be. First, I want to look at brand power and the idea of logos and the language that they have. There are some logos and some brands that are almost universally known, or they have a power of visibility, such as Apple or Chanel, for a couple of examples. And that means that the logos don't even need to be named. They don't have to have the name of the brand on in order to be recognised. They stand alone. This is kind of symbolic of how big brands and companies hide in clear view. Their image and their products are visible to the public, but the processes of their production, the exploitation that they're part of, the money that they make, and the power that they have over the world are all covered over, like how their name doesn't have to be said, it's just this logo and this image. Having an image means something that can connect a brand to a global market, even with language and cultural barriers, and the company can still be recognised. In Naomi Klein's book No Logo, she says that logos, by the force of ubiquity, have become the closest thing we have to an international language. Although Klein's book is called No Logo, she's not actually arguing for there not to be any logos for brands. She uses the idea of a brand logo as a symbol of the power of global capitalism throughout the world. If globalisation is solely about the marketing and the product and the profits rather than this kind of global interconnectivity that we could have, then the whole concept of it needs to be changed. But within capitalism, within fast fashion, within this brand power, brands and corporations are using global connections to segregate the world, to exploit some people and sell to others. And they're doing this almost entirely unopposed, on a large scale at least. In being able to do this, they're the people with the wealth, and within a capitalist system that means having all the power. Naomi Klein argues that these systems of power and exploitation can only hide behind the logos of the brands and the image of the brands for so long before the exploitation is known and people will act out against them. Naomi Klein wrote No Logo in 2000, which obviously now is 19 years ago, and while there has been a move away from the trust that people have in brands, for example, there's been more of a focus on ethical manufacturing. The dungarees I'm wearing at the moment are Lucy and Yak, which is one of the brands that you could say are ethical manufacturers rather than fast fashion companies. But this hasn't been backlash enough, it's not on a wide enough scale. There was recently news that the world has until the year 2030 to stop climate change before the conditions are irreversible. And unless the global brands that have the power over the earth is questioned, then this isn't going to be able to happen. So I also want to have a look at what's wrong with the systems of production. The most well-known incident that exposes the exploitation within clothing production is the Rana Plaza collapse, which was in Bangladesh, in the Rana Plaza factory in 2013. There had been complaints by workers the day before the building collapsed that the building was unstable and that they didn't want to go in, but they were told that if they didn't go in and keep working, then their pay would be docked for a month. In Bangladesh, particularly for people working in the garment manufacture industry, not being paid for a month is equal to starvation. So the workers went into the building and the factory later collapsed, killing or injuring most of the people who were inside. The date of the collapse was the 24th of April 2013, which was my 16th birthday, where I was probably receiving clothing that was made in factories such as the Rana Plaza building. So it really does strike home to me when I think about this incident. Not that it wouldn't otherwise, but it has that very personal connection. It makes us question that if this is the outcome of having to manufacture in this way to keep prices of fast fashion clothing low, then why does this fast fashion exist? Surely no piece of fashionable clothing is worth people dying for. The issue is that it's not the clothing, the individual fashionable garments that these people are being exploited for and that they're dying for. It is the profits of the big companies who are creating these garments and overall the upkeep of capitalism. In the book Stitched Up by Tansy Hoskins, she says that fashion is more than just clothes. It is a commodity cycle of newness that makes clothing go out of date and keeps retailers in business. But then how does this idea link to globalization? Like I mentioned earlier, it's the invisibility of the power that brands have, which is possible through an idea called social distancing between aspects of the globalized world. The main process within this idea of social distancing is the removal of a direct bargaining relationship between the consumer and the producer, so the person making the clothes and the person who ultimately buys them. You don't buy your new t-shirt from the person who made it. It goes through so many different processes and is shipped over and is transported before it gets to you. This means that the people who are sewing the garments essentially have nothing to do with the brand that these garments are being produced for. The workers often only even know the name of the brand because of the labels that they have to sew into them. They're not connected with them in any kind of contractual way or intimate way at all. In a Marxist term, this is called alienation of the worker, and what this means is that the worker does not have any sort of tangible connection to what they're producing. Like, producing clothes can be a very pleasurable experience. I'm sure a lot of people who might be watching this video make their own clothes or craft or make their own things, and that can have a personal connection to you. But if you're doing it just for it to go to someone who has nothing to do with you, and you're not being paid properly for your labour, then you don't have that connection at all. It's taken away and your work is devalued for it. This is social distancing, and then it's combined with a very physical distance where things are made in different countries throughout the world that are very far apart. In Stitched Up, Hoskins explains that retailers hire manufacturers, who hire contractors, who hire subcontractors, who hire garment workers. This chain allows retailers to claim that they're not responsible for garment workers. So although capitalists, people in charge of the big companies, the people who are making the profits, who are ordering the clothes and therefore are owning the means of the production, they may not know exactly who is making their products, but they do know that the conditions for that production are bad, because they're paying as little for it as they possibly can. Globalisation means that lower standards of living in different parts of the world are able to be exploited, which is also often the remnants of a past colonial exploitation. If there is this social distance between the retailer and the producer, then there's another layer between the producer and the consumer. So the company and the producer has enough of a gap between it, and then when you buy the clothes it's an even bigger one. This problem has led to recent movements like the Who Made My Clothes campaign. The Who Made My Clothes movement was started by the Fashion Revolution Foundation. It was part of Fashion Revolution Week in April last year, 2018, which was to commemorate 5 years since the Rana Plaza factory collapse. On the Fashion Revolution website, they say that we encourage millions of people to ask brands #WhoMadeMyClothes and demand greater transparency in the fashion supply chain. The more people who ask #WhoMadeMyClothes, the more brands will listen. Use your voice and your power to change the fashion industry. I personally saw a fair amount of people and brands, particularly on Instagram, taking part in Fashion Revolution Week and using the hashtag Who Made My Clothes. But most of the participation was independent designers or smaller brands posting photos with signs of the garment workers holding the signs saying "I made your clothes." This is all amazing in terms of highlighting that clothing is actually produced by someone always. It doesn't appear out of thin air. And that in supporting independent or more local manufacturers and designers, you know exactly who is benefiting from your purchase. It's also interesting for the role of social media in breaching some of that social distance that I mentioned, where maybe the world is globally connected if we only have to look at a screen to be able to see the people who made the clothes that we wear. However, the spaces where social distance is the largest space and where the producers of clothing are invisible and exploited are big brands and companies, the kinds of people who weren't taking part in the Who Made My Clothes movement. The Fashion Revolution Foundation encourages people to use the hashtag Who Made My Clothes on social media and to sign the manifesto and to email brands asking who made the clothes that they produce. But we have to question how much difference this can make on its own. How much power does the consumer actually have over the global fashion industry? There has been an ideology in a lot of spaces in recent years, and probably far before that, that the consumer is king and that whatever the consumer does goes, and that it's all up to our individual choices. The power that consumers and individual consumers have over the unethical fashion industry is grossly exaggerated a large amount of the time in order to blame individual consumers for their actions rather than the companies themselves, the capitalists, who are actually pulling the strings. Ethical consumption recently as a movement, as a life choice, has been very popularized, but in the end, in the scale of a globalized fashion trade, no one person's individual choice is going to make the amount of change that's needed. I'm going to take another quote from Margaret Maynard, and she says that ecological concerns are the privilege of the well-off in our society. For the majority of global consumers do not have the kind of choice that can incorporate ethical decisions. Even within the UK, which is supposedly a well-off country, there's people who aren't going to be able to afford ethical clothing. Ethical clothing is great, it's an amazing thing, but the few people who are able to engage with that isn't going to change the whole industry, particularly on a global scale. As it currently stands, the whole system of globalization is working only for the profit of a capitalist system. People aren't globally connected like they're assumed to be. In fact, the systems of production are creating social distance rather than bridging it. This means that a backlash to global capitalism, to global exploitation, to fast fashion, unethical fashion, an industry that's harming not just the producers and the people but also the environmental world, needs to be a global backlash reaction. I'm not trying to film this video here to change the world. Obviously that is not going to happen in my bedroom standing here today. I just wanted to explain a little bit about issues of globalization, why our ethical fashion choices are important, but why we also can't limit a movement to just that. And I think that's all I've got to say today. Thank you for watching. If you want to fight, I don't know why you'd want to fight, because I'm just trying to say people shouldn't be exploited and the world should be good. So yeah, I'll see you maybe at some point. See you later. Goodbye.